C.S. Lewis, the creator of the Chronicles of Narnia, was an atheist who converted to Christianity. How did that happen? Find out in today's episode.
Welcome to 15 Minutes with Chuck, where we feature interviews with music artists, entertainers, scientists, and more. Here's your host, a software consultant, teacher, and space enthusiast, Chuck Fields.
Thank you so much for joining me today. It is my pleasure to introduce Norman Stone. He's the director of the new documentary called The Most Reluctant Convert, the Untold Story of C.S. Lewis. Clive Staples Lewis, more commonly known as C.S. Lewis, was one of the intellectual giants of the 20th century. He wrote more than 30 books, including the Chronicles of Narnia, which have sold more than 100 million copies. C.S. Lewis is also known as a former atheist who converted to Christianity. A film that chronicles his transformation has recently been released called The Most Reluctant Convert, the Untold Story of C.S. Lewis.
I never cared for my name, Clive Staples. The world came to know me as C.S. Lewis. Perhaps you read my books. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is the most famous, but there's one story that's not so well known. It's my story. At 14, I ceased to be a Christian.
Your mother loves you very much.
Either there's no God behind the universe, a God indifferent to good and evil, or worse, an evil God.
How could a mere man be called a great moral teacher and say the sort of things Jesus said?
That night, as I read Phantastes, my imagination was baptized. The rest of me took a little longer.
Norman, welcome again from Scotland. Appreciate you joining me today.
I'm glad to be here.
Well, I want to talk about your amazing filmmaking before we get into this incredible film. I understand you began your career as the youngest producer and director to be working at the BBC.
Well, that's what they say, but clearly they don't have many 3-year-olds directing, but there we are. It was a long time ago. But yes, I was very fortunate. In those days, you couldn't get a job without a union card. You couldn't get a union card without a job.
Right.
Catch-22, but they did want to have more union members in the BBC. That all collapsed later. But I went straight into the BBC as a director-producer, which I was very grateful for. It's a rare opportunity, and I stayed. I left the BBC in 1980, went freelance, work for them a lot, still do, but do feature films too as well.
Well, let me ask this. Where did your passion for film directing begin? When did you first realize this is what I want to do?
Blame my grandfather.
I'll blame your grandfather.
He was a great storyteller. And when I'm using 3 again, it was true. When I was 3, I remember distinctly, probably my earliest memory, sitting on his knee, and he told me a story. He was a little bit Christian guy, and he invented all these other stories. And I saw pictures, and that was weird. It's the first time I remember it. And I can remember that story many, many years later because I can see the pictures. And I was once interviewed quite a few years ago, asked a question. I thought, where did I begin? And I realized it was my Granda Gordon, as we called him. And he died when I was 6. But in that 3-year period, he stuffed me with stories. I couldn't wait. More. And then I discovered television did the same, but not quite as well. The pictures weren't as good. But there we are. So, no, that's what started it. And I am as happy as a sandboy working with stories, pictures, and often music. I've done...
Norman, I think that's wonderful. And I did want to kind of go back again. So you went BBC, and that's where I think you did actually your first film that involves C.S. Lewis called The Shadowlands.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
It was in 1984. Heavens. So it was. I left the BBC to go freelance in 1980. I'd just done a film about a blind and deaf Cornish poet who really had earned the right to be heard. He could speak, and I made this film about his life, fascinating, and it was hugely popular. And I thought, why is that? Of course, it's because he's earned the right to be heard. When he speaks, it costs. It's worth listening to. Who else do I know who's worth listening to has earned the right to be heard? And it took me about 2.5 seconds to think of C.S. Lewis.
Nice.
And that began an 18-month development period with me and going to Oxford and doing all these different things to find out. And the BBC then said, okay, we'll make it. It was very fortunate they did. Yes, and not much money, but an awful lot of heart. And I would still, it's my favorite film I've ever done.
That's wonderful.
This one that I've just made comes close.
Yeah, and I was going to say the film that you were first referring to about the blind and deaf Christian poet for our audience is called A Different Drummer.
That's the first one. Goodness, you have done your research. Absolutely.
That's what I'm here for, Norm. Fascinating people like you. I owe you that at least. But I do want to dive in. Let's dive into the most reluctant convert now. How did that come about?
Well, it's always someone else's fault, isn't it? It's Max McLean's fault. He's
good.
Max McLean is an actor. He's got a company called FPA, and he does a great job based in New York. They do an awful lot of theater work, and he's very up on Lewis, and he knows his words, his timbre, his thinking very much. And he'd made a one-man show that was apparently going great guns. And he phoned me. I've known Max for years. When I go to New York, we have dinner and so on. And he's a good chum. And he phoned me out of the blue, bored probably. He was driving. I do hope it was a hands-free conversation. But he was driving down to Raleigh or somewhere towards the south to do this show. And he'd been thinking. And he said, Norman, do you think I've got this great show. It's really working well. Do you think it would ever appear on a screen? I said, I don't know, Max. It's I don't know the show. And he said, no, I'll send you the script. And I said, well, it is the script. You're absolutely right. That's what I'll make it clear. And then he sent it. And after a moment or two, well, actually 2 days of regret, thinking Max is a good chum. I hate it when good chums send you their scripts and expect you to say, yes, yes, yes. So I then read it with gritted teeth, and it was wonderful. He'd stitched together Lewis's words like a little tailor from the books, making it absolutely electric. And I said, Max, this is great. You can't do it the way you do it on stage, of course. To cut a long story short, he then got me to write the screenplay, and I wanted to do it with a different style because we weren't spending masses of money, but it was great fun. And it seems to have touched a nerve. It's now in 123 countries. It was second, at one point, it was second most viewed cinema film in the whole of the States, coming second to Dune, which isn't a bad second, beat everyone else. And it just keeps on going. It's now on Apple, Google Plus, Amazon. It doesn't stop, which is unusual when you come from the BBC. That's my background. Things usually stop. But this one is just runaway truck at the moment, and we may be doing 2 more films as a result.
See, I think it's wonderful. And I do want to read some of the quotes. I went to the website, cslewismovie.com. I'm just reading a couple of these awesome quotes, reviews from the movie. One of them says, go knowing you'll have to use your brain. It's nice to watch a movie that was intellectually stimulating. Wonderful message. Another one, excellent. Such a clear portrayal of the difference between theism and Christianity. And then another one says, the best movie I've ever seen in a long time. Even my 9 and 11-year-old grands loved it.
Wow.
It's incredible. So I believe it was released back in November originally. And
November the 3rd. That's right. November the 3rd. And we, it's wonderful what Max and his team have done, especially since they don't usually make films. They're only theater. So they said, we'll put in a few cinemas. And I said, why? It's made for streamers or TV or something, but why? Well, we think it would just help the launch on November the 3rd. And on November the 4th, it was the second most viewed cinema film in the whole of America. So I took my hat off to him then. And since then, it just keeps on rolling. They're doing a great job pushing it forward. But to a point, word of mouth is probably the best thing that's ever happened to this film, because they were queuing around the block. I mean, that we were going to do that cinema burst on November the 3rd, just for the launch. It then ended up doing the rest of the week, then the week following, then the week following. 2 months later, they're still queuing for it. So it's worth a look. That's what I'd say. Very little to do with me other than it's a very nice film.
It is a nice film. And you mentioned this earlier about adapting a film that originally was done in theater to film. And I love how you did that, because I have to admit, for me, it was totally captivating. Just the opening scene, I thought, what's going on? And then, Max McLean talking to the camera, not to give it away too much, but that first person storytelling that he's so powerful at, and to capture that film. How hard was that to transition from his theater performance to here, I need to captivate this on film?
Well, the performance level, I mean, I'll give you my scariest moment in the whole film. Sure. We're about to shoot scene 1. Well, actually, it wasn't scene 1. It happens out of chronology. But the first scene we were going to do, when he comes out of the Oxford Natural History and Science Museum, and I'm standing there, the cameraman's standing there, everyone's all set up. It's the first thing. And Max leans over to me and says, "You do know, Norman, of course, that I've never acted on film before." I thought it was a joke. We'd talked about everything. Never thought of talking about that. Of course he had. No, he hadn't. I like to think that my cameraman didn't faint, but went to his camera and did it. And once we did, I shouted action and he came out. You know when somebody's got it. And it's not all theater actors that can make it work on camera. And he did a brilliant job, was very much the heart of Lewis and looked like Lewis. And it just took off from there. But I loved, I don't mind breaking the secret a little. I mean, if people go along, I think they will be captivated by the style. But I stole that from Dickens. Because I thought, how do you tell this story with so many different things? And how do we actually make it work? And I don't know whether you must have read or seen Christmas Carol. Well, yes. When the ghost of Christmas past takes the old unrepentant sinner Scrooge back to his school, I always felt that was so much more powerful, that the old guy watches himself before he's been ruined, and we could take any direction. And here he is, a really nasty piece of work now. And it moves me, still does, that you can get that emotional push and pull by just going back and letting the man himself in later years look at where he came from. So the idea was to do, as many dramas do, of course, have flashbacks through the person's life, but then he'd go through his memories, and he's talking to us, and very well, in Lewis's words. And then he starts to appear in his memories, which was great fun. I loved all that. And then he's suddenly almost interrupting himself when he said that at that time. So in other words, it's a fun ride with a really, fairly deep message. And that's why you got to use your brain as well. You can go and see it 10 times. Thank you. But it's all there, but with an emotional heart. And Lewis is just the man for that sort of treatment, you must admit.
He is. And this being your second awesome film about C.S. Lewis, do you feel, I guess, a personal connection with C.S. Lewis?
Yes, insofar as I got to know him quite well. In the original Shadowlands, we worked together on the script. The chap who actually ended up writing Gladiator, William Nicholson, now a hugely popular thing. He wrote it with me and David Thompson, who's a big producer over here. The three of us knew each other, and we got together and had breakfast meetings over it. But from that point, you go into every area of a person's life. And I've done a couple of other dips into the Lewis life as well since, because I'm a Christian and because he was, but he articulated it so well. Max McLean always says on his stage shows that he really likes playing C.S. Lewis because for 90 minutes, he can be really smart. And I understand that, because he is brilliant and he pays the price in his life of everything that happens. But my goodness, I'd have liked to have met him. I got close, I guess, because I know much about him. I've slept in the kilns. I've done the whole, which is his house. It is a world which is, he's self-deferential. That's the other thing. Humor against himself. He's not some stuffed proud man up there strutting his stuff. He's very human and very wise. That's all.
Wow. What's an incredible film. And I recommend all of our audience go out there and see it. And you might want to see it more than once, because there's so much to gain from it. But Norman, I do want to ask you, just for the future, what's next for you? What's coming up?
Well, I think I'm allowed to say this. First heard on your show. We are definitely going to be doing 2 more stylistic films in this way, going through the whole of Lewis's life. This is the beginning, if you like, from his birth through to his finally struggling with Christianity, becoming a convert. The middle years with Tolkien and a writing group called the Inklings and all the stuff there, and lots of things going right and wrong and everything. Is fascinating stuff that's coming up. And then after that, we would do the third one, which would be the end, which is getting close back to my original invention of Shadowlands, where his wife, Joy Davidman, if you haven't seen that, I suppose everyone knows about her, but she's amazing. And in fact, we're finding out a lot more about her now. And she gets cancer, she gets better. Hooray! She gets cancer and dies. And how he deals with that. That's going to be not a fake tearjerker, but you can't help by that time, after the third film, to get deeply into what this man is feeling. So it will be another 2 films. We've got to wait until we can fit it all in, but that's the plan.
Well, Norman, I can't thank you enough for just, taking your passion as a Christian, as a film director, to bring this stuff to home, to where people really need to feel and understand. And I just want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today. Really appreciate that, Norman. Thank you.
It's been a joy. And we'll hopefully talk again at some point.
That sounds awesome, Norman.
15 Minutes with Chuck.
Well, I really enjoyed my conversation with Norman today, and I'm loving his new film. If you'd like to learn more about it or to learn how to stream it, just go to cslewismovie.com. I want to thank Norman for joining me today. I want to thank you for joining us as well. If you could do me a small favor and share this episode with a friend or like it, I'd certainly appreciate it. Thanks so much for joining me. We'll see you next time. God bless.